Welcome, welcome, welcome. We're so glad you're here for SoulSpark Learning's Shine On Bright Educator event. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. And so SoulSpark Learning started this series because we're passionate about the well-being of educators and wanting to resource them and provide community in which we can share what is working for us, things we're curious to learn more about, and build connections so that we can help each other in adapting the practices for the context in which we teach, which might be at home. It might be you're joining us because you are a school resource officer or maybe part of the custodial team. All of us are educators for teachers or educators for students and for children. And so we will have 8 of these series, which focus on 8 sessions for educators that focus on different aspects or dimensions of development. And the first one is emotional development. So as we're going through today, we'd encourage you to pick one child. It might be a child that's struggling. It might not be. It might be one that's thriving and that you're trying to better understand, but hold them in your heart as we go through the session today and think about how the strategies that we're talking about might apply or not apply to them. Our objective is for everyone to leave with capacity to practice the emotional skills that correlate with life outcomes, achievement, health, self-efficacy, relationship quality, and with the community to collaborate on ways to integrate them into instruction. A little bit about our nonprofit. The word SoulSpark comes from the place where each person's unique constellation of strengths and interests connect with opportunities to shine and be of service in our community. As a nonprofit, our goal is to develop the skills needed to facilitate highly individualized and meaningful instruction. So we teach educators how to teach children rather than deliver curriculum. And sometimes those things are at odds. So our programming is all evidence informed. Our research is registered with the Library of Congress and supports these 8 aspects of development in practice. So tonight we're talking about emotional development, emotional intelligence. Really, how do we define that? This is something that we're particularly passionate about, and we'll go into the research as to why. But when it comes to emotional intelligence, as humans, we have a lot of biases, sometimes myths and misconceptions. When you do informal research projects on people's, and especially teachers' perceptions of students' emotional development as contrasted with actual emotional development, we find that there's often confusion of charisma, extroversion, and popularity with emotional development. So if we ask a teacher, which student do you think has the highest emotional development in your class? More often than not, they might say, name a student who's extroverted, charismatic, and popular, and that might not be the student with the highest emotional intelligence. So hopefully at the end of the session, you'll be able to have a little bit more of a conceptual framework to help understand the construct of emotional intelligence and develop those skills that, again, impact life outcomes. So a lot of the research we reference comes out of an organization called 6 Seconds. And 6 Seconds was started by a woman named Annabelle Jensen, and she was teaching the science of emotion to children at the Nueva School in San Francisco. And actually, Dan Goleman came and studied her when he wrote his first book on emotional intelligence. They have since developed psychometric assessment tools to measure the construct of emotional intelligence. And there's data now that spans like 30 years and more than 30 different languages and cultures all over the world. And the research has also been with neurodivergent youth. The Nueva School is a school for gifted youth. And so while there's been this huge movement for social emotional learning and mindfulness, meditation, mind training practices in school, that is wonderful. Not all of the curriculum is evidence informed specifically for neurodivergent, gifted, and multi-exceptional youth. And so that's part of the reason we reference their research. But now that data has shown that the skills, the 8 skills that we're going to go through today, account for about 50% of the variance in life outcomes. So if it has that big an impact, we feel as an organization responsibility to teach children the skills and strategies to support the development of those skills. And so unlike some other characteristics that are innate. Emotional intelligence scores can be improved significantly with practice. The skills are both measurable and learnable, coachable. If you're looking for another reason why to support emotional development, because we still run into certain organizations and people who are like, oh, schools for the 3 R's, reading, writing, and arithmetic, and there's no place for social emotional learning in school. That's something we teach at home. And we forget that, what we're learning from effective neuroscience, that when we emphasize the rational and minimize the emotional aspects of the academic curriculum, we're inadvertently developing the types of knowledge that don't transfer well to real world situations. What does that mean? Like in another sense, when we are engaging a student's emotions, when they're engaging in learning that is personally meaningful, has purpose to them, or they're engaging their imaginations, they're engaging the default mode network of the brain. And that default mode network of the brain is what helps children internalize their learning and apply it in new contexts. So it's all the more reason to make learning personally meaningful for students. If someone asks you why we should be supporting social emotional learning in school, if you email us, we have a flyer, one piece, an advocacy piece that speaks to the science. But these are quite simply some of the reasons. EQ skills improve life outcomes for the DMN activation, that part of the brain that supports internalizing learning, because toxic stress stunts growth, and the higher our emotional intelligence, it's a protective factor and supports resilience for students and their mental health. To prepare for careers of the future, we know in the next 10 to 20 years that 50% of the jobs that we know today are going to be eliminated, and the jobs that do remain are going to be those that require creative and emotional intelligence. For healthy school climate, teacher retention, schools where they have systemic social emotional learning programs have higher retention of teachers. And then again, those feelings of connection and purpose. Only one in, I should know exactly, I don't want to misstate here, but I think it's only 1 in 4 teens in the US report feeling a sense of purpose at school. And so as we've gone to more standards-based instruction, sometimes we're, as educators, not as responsive to children's questions and the things that they want to learn at school. But when we have strong social emotional learning programs, that helps us engage students in meaningful learning. COVID impact. Some people have been wondering how COVID has impacted emotional intelligence scores. And actually, emotional intelligence scores have been declining by 1 to 2% per year prior to 2016 pretty consistently. And then you'll see around 2016, 2017, there was that increase in social emotional learning, like in movies and in culture and social media and in curriculum. And then that started to improve, like the scores started to improve. And again, this is internationally. And then when COVID hit, there was a slight dip, and the skill that had the biggest impact on that dip is the skill of optimism. Optimism scores dropped among all populations with the exception of those, I believe it was over 35 or 40. And the reason for that is those over 35 or 40 were tasked with finding solutions to problems during COVID. And because they were looking at the solutions, they were looking at the possibilities, they were developing that skill. The one emotional skill that did increase during COVID was the skill of applying consequential thinking, which we'll look at a little bit later on, but that's being able to assess the short and long-term costs and benefits of our choices. So when we had to make decisions about, do we get a COVID vaccine? Do we go out and go get groceries if we're in an area where COVID rates are high? Do we take certain other safety precautions when we're out, like masking or not? So just to the extent that it's helpful, and for background information, there's a little bit of context about how we've developed as a society. And so I know there are some somatic practitioners on the line, and I'd invite you to chime in if you're able to on the microphone. When is not the time to teach emotional skills? Anyone? I know some of you might say when a child's dysregulated, right? If they are in heightened, if their nervous system is activated and they're not in that prefrontal cortex and they're not in that thinking part of the brain, it's not the time to teach emotional skills. And so there is the somatic piece, and that's something that we'll discuss on the session when we're talking about children's like physical development and nutrition, sleep, and the like. And we'll talk about somatic practices to develop the nervous system and feel comfortable and safe in our body and in relationship with others. But we're going to look a little bit more at the emotional skills themselves today. So we wouldn't teach if a student is dysregulated. First, we're going to practice some breathing practices and get them in their body before we're teaching emotional skills. So the competencies that tie to the research fall into the categories of self-awareness, self-management, and self-direction. And we'll look at each of these skills as we go through today. And so we'll start and dive into strategies to develop the emotional skills, beginning with the self-awareness skills. So to start off, I'd love if you are able to turn off your mic. Tell me what you see when you look at this picture.
I saw a love heart in the log.
How does the photo make you feel?
A vastness and calm for me.
Vastness and calm.
Feeling of being relaxed.
Relaxed. And so the reason this picture is here is twofold. One is because to illustrate that our past experiences and our thoughts do influence our emotions, right? If we have had experiences of calm in nature, or when we've been on a hike, we might go to that place in our memory and our perception where we are remembering being calm in nature and hiking, right? Or feeling peaceful and connected outside. If someone who spends a lot of time taking care of plants might be worried that the tree is hurt, right? And so our backgrounds influence our emotions and our perceptions and how we're thinking and feeling. And also the other reason that this is here is because we often think that it's like one emotion happening at a time, and oftentimes we can have multiple emotions simultaneously. We can feel sad for the tree, we can feel peace and calm, we can feel hope on the horizon. All of these things can occur simultaneously, and at the same time it's also here because when you look at the research, only about 1 in 3 adults can accurately identify their emotions as they occur. And so something that seems so easy actually requires quite a bit of practice. And through explicit instruction in these skills, we can help children better understand the data that emotions are providing to help them make better decisions and feel more comfortable in their bodies. So that space between our thoughts and our emotions, they're still trying to figure out which comes first, like a lot of scientists, right? The physiological experience in our body, the thoughts, or the emotions. And we know that our thoughts and perceptions influence how we feel and how we're feeling in our body. And I have How We See Teaches. It's something that I feel very strongly about. We work, many here work with the students with very strong sensory systems that are very in tune. And so oftentimes they can see, they can feel how adults are seeing them or thinking about them. And similarly, how we see influences our actions and behaviors. So how we like to say at SoulSpark Learning, how we see children teaches them who they can become. Because if we can walk away with one thing from this session, if we can see children through the lens of their strengths and possibilities, outcomes are going to improve. So starting with that skill of emotional literacy, validate is here. Many of our students who are neurodivergent are often getting negative messaging, like little microaggressions. You're too sensitive, you're too intense, right? You overanalyze, you think too much. And so it's really important, in order to grow their self-awareness, we need to validate how they're feeling, no matter what that emotion might be. I have this is actually my own children, and we have a running race here in Boulder, and we would always dress in costume to make it more fun, to inspire engagement. But here they're dressed as office workers, which is I have, because the higher a child's IQ, the more efficient and effective they are at masking. And so for many of our students, we're telling them to be different, to be the change we want to see in the world, to embrace themselves. But sometimes our implicit messaging is still fit into the box, and be that office worker. Right. So one of the things we can do as an informal activity with our children is have them make heart maps. What are the things that are important to them? To like what brings them joy, and starting with learning what brings them joy, that's a key to their emotional health, right? And so if they can find ways to access those feelings of joy by connecting those with those things and activities, people that are important to them, it's a great first step. Plutchik's theory of emotions. Part of emotional literacy is teaching children to be able to recognize the emotions in their body. And that can be done by enhancing their emotional vocabulary. This helps us better understand the relationships among the emotions, degrees of intensity, what happens when different emotions combine, and how frequent emotional patterns can contribute to our personality development. You can have a feeling wheel at home or school to help children identify degrees of different emotions that can help improve their emotional literacy. And then teaching them that every emotion provides important data, right? How is the feeling helping you? There's no good or bad feelings. They all serve a purpose. Are you angry? Is something getting in your way? What is that? Let's dive deeper. Again, remembering that it might be hard for children to identify the emotions. And if you don't have a feeling wheel, you can simply write on a piece of paper the emotions that you think they might be having and allow them to point to them or circle them. And you can go through them individually and find out, well, you're feeling frustrated. Are you not getting something you want? What is that? How can we work through that? Sad. Did you lose something that's causing you pain, etc. And then we can more easily coach once we help them in identifying those emotions. For the somatic practitioners here, also getting children in touch with what those different feelings and emotions feel like in their body so that they can better recognize them. Anxiety is one of those, right? The anxiety for different people can feel differently. For some, it might they might experience as a tightening in the gut, and their hands might start to clench. They might start to sweat. I'm noticing there are something in the chat that I can't see right now, so I was going to pull that up. Oh, perfect, no problem. Thank you and please feel free. I'll keep the chat up now and can continue to see that. Breathing strategies. There are so many different breathing strategies right now. A common one is box breathing, and different people do it different ways. Often people, breathe in for 4 seconds, hold for 4 seconds, breathe out for 4 seconds, hold for 4 seconds, and breathe that way. Some say for box breathing, some science says breathe in for 4 seconds, hold for 7 seconds, exhale for 8 seconds. So some would say differently. And then actually the name 6 seconds from that organization came from the fact that everything after 6 seconds is learned behavior. And so if we can teach children to breathe in and out for 6 seconds, then we can switch from that amygdala to the prefrontal cortex and have a better chance of making good decisions. So depending on the age of the children, you might be able to talk about the science of the brain to move from the amygdala to the prefrontal cortex. You might be able to, or you might, if they're younger students, you might talk about getting from their lizard brain to their wizard brain to make a good decision. But any kind of breathing practice is going to support emotional literacy, because we're going to be able to, once we're resourced, have a better we'll better be able to understand what's happening in our body and with our thoughts and feelings. Recognizing behavioral patterns. These are our awareness of our habits, right? How does the media I consume affect my nervous system and mood? What do I do in the 30 minutes before sleep to prepare for high quality sleep? Do the foods I eat give me energy, or do they make me feel lethargic? Do I have a spike of energy and then crash? When is it easy for me to make time for exercise or do a non-preferred task, right? And so how can I create those conditions so it's easier for me to have behaviors that are going to help me achieve my goals and the outcomes I'm hoping for? Recognizing patterns, we can support the development of children's skill of recognizing patterns by teaching practices to develop new habits, right? It can be things like just setting a simple goal and a timeline. Maybe I want to start practicing, practicing, I don't know, Mandarin this year. And so I'm going to practice 10 minutes a day using Duolingo. And I'm going to try and practice 10 minutes a day for 30 days. Not make it too big so that I can see how small changes in my behaviors help impact progress. Thinking again about how can I create the condition where it's easier for me to try the new practice? Do I go and sit in my favorite chair? Do I light a candle as an adult, right? But as a young child, it might be like, do I have my stuffy with me, etc. Maybe making a routine to start that new task if it feels uncomfortable. And so I'm going to give myself, I'm going to do these 3 things and I'm going to get started. I'm going to get my favorite pen out, my favorite paper, and then I'm going to set a timer to practice. And then that's how I know I'm ready to begin. I'll create a system for recording progress, maybe identify an accountability partner. I'm going to ask Sarah, hey, Sarah, will you check in with me and make sure that how I'm doing on my practice? And then thinking about challenges I'm having with the practice and maybe changes I might want to make. So that's how we can help children in developing that skill. Because we're a small group, I'm not going to have us move. Sometimes with a bigger group, we might take a movement break, but it's to remember to always take care of our bodies as well. That next cluster of skills are self-management skills. Optimism. Optimism of all of the emotional skills has the biggest impact on emotional intelligence scores. And so that's the ability to take a perspective of choice and opportunity when challenges present. It's not hiding difficult or challenging feelings. It's not that Pollyanna, let's say, toxic positivity where we ignore challenges or problems. We put blindfolds on. It's, again, being able to look at the choices and opportunities when challenges present. Why is optimism so important? It's important, again, because of that impact overall on health and well-being. It's particularly important for neurodivergent, gifted, and talented youth because of the predisposition to anxiety. And that's an article from Scientific American by a number of people, and it actually was a Mensa study that showed potentially that gifted youth are more potentially predisposed to anxiety. There's data that shows increased risk of relational aggression and bullying, that it's double the rate of same age peers by the time children are in 8th grade for gifted students. Relative shortage of highly trained gifted educators means children are less likely to have the programming they need to sustain their learning and growth. So optimism becomes that much important to their well-being. Sometimes in some contexts, there's shortage of peers to help them grow their self-awareness and validate the gifted experience. There might be lack of access, especially in rural areas, to enrichment opportunities, although that's improved with online programming, and just because of the biases, myths, and misconceptions that exist, as well as some of the microaggressions that our kids experience at school. And so having optimism and being able to take a perspective of choice and opportunity when these challenges present is really going to, again, support health over the lifespan. thing that we can do to develop optimism is ask children what kind of seeds are they planting, or thoughts are they planting, seeds or weeds. So if we hear a child engage in negative self-talk, I might go and pretend to pluck that. I'm going to say, I'm going to pluck that weed. Let's replace it with a thought seed, like in a positive, might teach about mantras, for example, or positive self-talk. You might keep a journal to reflect on the connection between thoughts, behaviors, relationships, and performance. Monitor thoughts. Sometimes I'll have a student keep a bracelet on one wrist, and if they notice themselves engaging in negative thinking or self-talk, to switch it on to the other wrist. And then when they start to start looking towards opportunities and solutions, rather than getting stuck in that worry or feelings of helplessness, switch it back so that they can have more consciousness around their thought patterns. You can create a wall of courage to celebrate the times your class or family took positive risks that supported learning or growth. Again, remembering that many of our gifted youth are perfectionists and their own worst critics. Questions that you can ask to develop optimism. And so some that I will use sometimes is, what would you do if it was impossible to fail? If you see a child, again, getting stuck, what would your role model do? Right? Especially if you know someone that the child really looks up to, maybe whether it's an athlete, a musician, a scholar, scientist, right? What might Einstein do in this situation? What excites you about this? What are 10 more options, even wacky, silly ones that you haven't tried yet? What would you do if you could use magic? What would you do if you had $1 million? Is what you're thinking really, are the thoughts in your head, are they really true? What are you grateful for? What would your ideal outcome look like? Start to try and visualize that. So visualization practices are also going to support the development of optimism. Thinking about what is beyond your control, helping children realize what they can release, what doesn't serve them. Can you tear it, shred it, throw it in the trash? I used to have a little shredder that kids could put their worries in or things they were stressed about, and they could shred them, which was physically very satisfying for a lot of children. Draft mantras and affirmations. I've had students make little dolls or characters of themselves with thought bubbles saying their mantras or positive phrase, things that they want to rehearse, so that when they do notice feelings of stress or anxiety, they can practice that self-talk. And sometimes it helps to have a visual reminder of that. Establish a gratitude practice. Any kind of gratitude practice is going to develop optimism because it focuses our attention on what is working and who supports us. Say identify a PMA partner. PMA actually was something that came from my family, from my grandfather and my aunt. My grandfather was raised by a community in downtown Milwaukee. When his mom passed when he was 5, and he taught us PMA, positive mental attitude, that we can't control what happens to us, but we get to choose how we respond. So a PMA partner is someone that can help us process especially challenging events. They remind us that we can't control, again, what happens to us, but we get to choose. Our power is in how we respond, and they might help us choose and identify different creative ways that we might respond that help us build relationships and come up with new solutions and ideas. The rewards of optimism, again, it can be exhausting, right? Like some people think that, oh, like someone is just, their personality is they're just optimistic or they're just pessimistic, and that actually is not true. Again, it is a skill that we can develop with practice. Those who score high in optimism are 8 times more likely to have high success factor scores. So if we can focus on one skill of all the skills, optimism is a pretty critical one. Intrinsic motivation also ties to that category of skills that are support self-management. So this is being driven by our own values and priorities rather than those of others. And for our gifted youth who are empathic, they can often internalize or understand what others are thinking or expecting of them. And then again, because we know that they have greater capacity for masking, they might develop pleasing behaviors and give people what's expected. So there can be self-distancing to that, and they can lose touch with what's truly important to them. We can support the development of the skill of intrinsic motivation by making, for example, a values crest. This is something I did with my children when they were in preschool and kindergarten. We talked about the values that were important to us as a family, and then we made this heart, and it still sits next to our dining room today. So when we have challenging decisions that present, we can look at the options that best align with our values. We can ask, what can we do to strengthen our relationship with who and what is most important to us? Reflect on the times the choices didn't align with our values. And we can talk about that as adults. Did we make a choice that didn't align, and what were the consequences of that, to help grow that skill for the children in our care? We can also develop intrinsic motivation by creating a norm of soliciting feedback and how important it is to have high quality feedback. And so we can ask, who challenges our thinking and opens our eyes to new perspectives? Describe how you can increase the chances someone will provide authentic feedback rather than praise to please, right? Especially as class sizes get larger, it can be harder or more difficult for educators to give high quality specific feedback that helps children improve and grow. So we just, again, want to get in the habit of seeking feedback so we can always see how we can continue to learn. And one of the best ways we can do that is also by modeling it ourselves, right? Within our teams, within our families. And then similar to emotional literacy, navigating emotions is really helping children use the data or the wisdom from the feeling to help guide their decision making. We can help children improve this skill by describing a time that a big feeling got the best of us. Do we have behaviors that negatively impact our relationships? Did we not perform as hoped? How can we better recognize the data our emotion was trying to tell us and navigate it differently? And there are a lot of stories that can support us that we can use for read alouds with children in the classroom or at home that help children in developing the skill too. One book that comes to mind is Moody Cow Meditates. It's a cow that's having a very bad, no good day. All kinds of rotten things happen to him. And he learns how to meditate and navigate his emotions and then make different choices. The skill of consequential thinking is assessing the short and long-term costs and benefits of our choices. We can develop this skill by helping children make decision-making maps, pros and cons lists. What happens if you do nothing? Are we avoiding making a decision? If so, why? What are the consequences of avoiding making a decision? This relates a little bit to our nervous system. Conscious media consumption. How does the media we're consuming have impact your nervous system and emotions? There's increased access to media now in this age, and so it would be negligent not for us to help children understand what they're seeing and consuming, how that affects their emotions and behaviors as well. The last cluster of skills are self-direction skills, which are empathy and pursuing noble goals. The skill of empathy we can develop all different ways. And again, these, like as we go through, these are a couple of strategies for each of these skills. The nonprofit, we have emotional skill menus where we have a variety of strategies that we can list to support the development of each skill, but just kind of for some examples, we can develop the skill of empathy through any kind of mirror games where I'm moving and you're trying to follow me along and really pay close attention to my body. One of my favorites is an emotion plus activity game. So I'll take a deck of cards, and one deck of cards are like note cards. I'll write all different emotions. On the other set, I will write different activities like riding a bike, climbing a ladder, picking flowers, baking cookies. And then children will pick one activity and one emotion and act that out with while feeling the emotion that they picked, and then having other students and children guess. Any kind of role-playing game works, or charades too, where children can act out the feeling and people are trying to guess. It helps grow empathy and also emotional literacy. Pursuing noble goals, that's aligning our daily choices with our deep sense of purpose and meaning. So it's really supporting our existential development as well, our spiritual development. One way we can support children in that is by making the mundane meaningful, by taking a creative perspective on a dreaded task, right? We all, for me, I don't like doing the dishes, right? So how can I change the way I experience that dreaded or boring activity, right? If I make a game out of it, if I turn music on and make silly dances in the kitchen, and so if I'm being playful about that non-preferred task, I'm more likely to have positive relationships with those around me versus if I'm complaining about it, right? And so that's something we can model for children and teach them too. How might that change in perspective again impact our relationship? So this is a picture actually of my daughter. We were camping and we had to fetch wood. So, and she didn't want to go and fetch wood. And so she took a little beetle with her on an adventure. She had a new little friend and it became more fun. And then she found some wood. So this is kind of like the Buddhist phrase, right? Fetch wood, but before enlightenment, fetch wood, after enlightenment, fetch wood, like with the responsibility of, with the privilege, excuse me, of community comes responsibility. Right. And so no matter what career or passion our children have, they're always going to be less preferred task. Even if you want to be let's say you want to be a sculptor, you probably are still going to have to learn math and learn how to manage your finances. Having that skill of the skill of pursuing noble goals and again, aligning your choices with purpose will help our children realize their goals. I have here perfectionism versus striving for excellence. When children are exhibiting perfectionistic behavior, they might be low in the skill of consequential thinking or recognizing behavioral patterns. They might be low in the skill of empathy and specifically self-empathy. So perfectionist behavior might inhibit learning and growth if we're afraid to take a risk or try something new, to stretch ourselves to our learning edge, outside our comfort zone. So strategies to support children in striving for excellence instead of those kind of paralyzing perfectionist behaviors can include setting time and effort level expectations. So again, this might be a non-preferred task. Guess what? We're going to practice for 5 minutes on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being your very best effort. We're going to give it a level 6 effort for 10 minutes. And then that becomes a little bit more manageable and easier to access, right? And so we can help children learn to prioritize this way too, especially as they get older and maybe are managing more homework in middle school and high school. Okay, this assignment might require more like a level 8 effort, and it might be an hour a day over the course of a couple of weeks versus, you know what, this assignment is more like we're going to do 15 minutes again at a lower effort. We can celebrate the journey, explore the relationship between grades and emotions. We have children who get really stuck in the percentile, getting a certain percentile or a certain grade. So we can help them continue to strive for excellence by saying, you know, well, what, maybe you got an 80% here, but how much did you learn? Right. And is there a way, like how would 100% have felt? Is there a different way you can get that emotion? Thinking about those things, maybe your heart map, what things bring you joy, right? What can we do to return to those emotions that you're seeking and still focus on learning and growth and celebrate where we had the biggest growth, right? Like I remember coming home as a child, my dad taught world history and psychology, and coming home, you know, my first time I had grades, like probably in my early high school career, and being so excited because I had A's. My dad's like, I don't care. What'd you learn? Right? I'd rather have you have a C in a hard class where you learned a ton than get this great grade, right? So that's part of the culture that we set to as adults. And reminding that if we want to explore the unknown, if we want to innovate a lot of times or achieve things that haven't been achieved before, we're going to have to fail and make mistakes, right? If it's something that hasn't been done before, failure might be requisite to success. And again, the search for criticism, getting in the habit of asking for positive feedback, critical feedback, so that we can continue to learn and grow and improve. This is a little bit of a pop quiz. I won't put you on the spot by asking you the questions. But if you're looking to support a student who is struggling with impulsivity might be low in the skill of recognizing patterns and consequential thinking. A student who gets overwhelmed by others' feelings might be low in navigating emotions and high in empathy. A child that under evaluates risk might be high in optimism and low in consequential thinking. A child who overanalyzes might be high in consequential thinking and low in emotional literacy or empathy. Someone who runs over other people in pursuit of their purpose might be lower in empathy and high in noble goals. A child who is passive and has learned helplessness might be low in intrinsic motivation and optimism. And again, a child who has perfectionistic behaviors might be low in that consequential thinking, recognizing patterns or empathy. Just another piece about those emotional skills and emotional intelligence scores. No one has a perfect emotional intelligence scores. After years of actually doing the psychometric assessments, we have people who have very high emotional skills, but I haven't seen, just like there isn't like any such thing as a perfect IQ score, I haven't seen a perfect emotional intelligence score. So we all have skills that we're working on. And the nice thing about having a framework to talk about emotional skills, when we get to some of those tender conversations around behavior, if we have a framework for talking about the skills, it can be more productive and child-centered, because instead of it being like, oh, just as a parent, you should be doing this at home, or you should be doing this different in the classroom, instead we can come together as parents and educators and say, oh, recognize, oh, wow, this child is really high in the skill of consequential thinking, but maybe needs a little bit more support in developing their intrinsic motivation. And then we can focus on strategies and better collaborate. And so just as another side note, again, these emotional skills are a protective factor, but just like an elite athlete could injure themselves playing a sport, so too can a student with high emotional intelligence still experience trauma or psychological injury from any kind of neglect, abuse, oppression, etc. And so we have emotional intelligence scores, which is really, yes, it can support and protect mental health, but mental health still is a separate construct. We can support children in assessing their stress and helping them realize when the stress level might be too high, because when it is, it can inhibit neuroplasticity and learning and growth. So we want to always keep those stress levels to a manageable level. So again, emotional intelligence contrasted with mental health. Understanding trauma. We're not going to go into trauma here. We have other sessions we do on trauma, but again, reminding that anyone can experience psychological injuries from violence, abuse, or neglect. And unbearable feelings can result in really extreme coping behaviors. And so that's a time to seek the support of outside mental health professionals, clinicians. What we can do at home or school is develop toolbox to support students in regulating too, which might include, it could be an actual physical box, like a sensory toolkit. It could be a checklist of things that they could do in the moment, creative practicing. Do they like poetry, knitting, cooking, gardening, painting, tinkering in the garage, time in nature, yoga, taking a bath, meditating, all these things. Going for a walk, playing with essential oils. One of my favorites, doing puzzles. And so they have that resource kit at their disposal. You can also have them develop a list, and it might be a picture to remind them of who is on their support crew, who they can go to when they need help or support. It might be a school counselor, it might be a neighbor, family members, it might be a doctor, a therapist. It could be so many different people. It could be a coach or other instructor, a music teacher. So when you're developing goals for your children in the state of Colorado, it might be advanced learning plan goals. For neurodivergent gifted youth, it could be IEP goals. Oh, excuse me, it says measuring optimism. It should say measuring emotional intelligence. My apologies there. You probably don't have access to those psychometric assessment tools to measure emotional intelligence, but the nonprofit, we have a little questionnaire that helps in assessing the strength of different emotional skills. So if you email us, we're happy to share and provide this as well. And in this case, it's also kind of an education tool as well. And so we have a form that is student-centered, where a student could respond, and we have one also that is educator or parent or caregiver center, where it says, my child, can I can identify their emotions as they occur and express them in healthy ways. And so they can rate on a Likert scale, and it can help you decide where, what goals or what skills you want to start with in your goal planning. So for example, you could write a goal like the student will develop their optimism by, and then picking a few strategies to practice, and then say progress will be measured by student reflection and educator observations on the use of these strategies, as well as self-rating on the emotional skills questionnaire. So that's a way that you could write a SMART goal to satisfy the requirements for an IEP or ALP, and have them really targeted on skills that we know will improve life outcomes. And so this is an example of our emotional skills menu. This is strategies for the skill of optimism. And so if you'd like that, I'm happy to share that as well. And know that was an awful lot of information. And so go back to those like just simple practices. Again, remembering how we see children teaches them who they can become. They're feeling how we think about them. And then just remember 40 seconds of compassion creates a measurable reduction in anxiety. That comes from the book Compassionomics, which was research on doctors, and specifically those doctors that said that they didn't have time for bedside, like kind of bedside manners, if you will, or to connect with patients. And they showed that those doctors who took 40 seconds, that there was a measurable impact in the outcomes for those patients. So that's where that research comes from. We have different advocacy tools. This is a flyer that speaks to why it is important to support student emotional development at school. If you email us, we're happy to send this to you. And also always at any time, if you have specific questions around implementation or want to brainstorm with someone, maybe you have a specific curriculum and you're trying to figure out how to teach the skills within that, please reach out. Donations are always welcome. Our next event as the nonprofit for the month of February, we'll do an event on supporting children's creative development. And so I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen here. I'm going to stop the recording. I'll go ahead and stop it. Thank you so much for being here with us tonight, and we'll hope to see you next month.